The classroom was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner and the occasional shuffle of papers. The teacher, a stern woman with sharp features and a reputation for being strict, stood at the front of the room. Her eyes scanned the students, landing on a boy sitting near the back. He was quiet, always keeping to himself, and often the target of her sharp remarks. She didn't like him, not because of anything he had done, but because of where he came from. His skin was darker than most in the class, and his accent was different. To her, that was enough to make him stand out in a way she didn't appreciate. The boy, however, didn't let her disdain bother him, at least not outwardly. He was used to being treated differently. He had moved to this town a year ago, and since then, he had learned to keep his head down and focus on his studies. He wasn't here to make friends or impress anyone. He just wanted to get through the day without any trouble. But trouble seemed to find him anyway. That day, the teacher announced a class activity. "We're going to have a little performance," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Each of you will come up and play a piece on the piano. It's a great way to showcase your talents." The boy's heart sank. He didn't know how to play the piano. He had never even touched one before. But before he could say anything, the teacher's eyes locked onto his. "You," she said, pointing at him. "You'll go first." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at him. He could feel their eyes on him, some curious, others amused. He hesitated, then stood up slowly, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. He walked to the front of the room, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do? He didn't know the first thing about playing the piano. The teacher smirked as she gestured to the instrument. "Go on," she said. "Show us what you've got." The boy sat down on the piano bench, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the keys, unsure of what to do. He pressed one key, then another, the notes clashing awkwardly. A few students snickered, and the teacher's smirk widened. She had expected this. She had wanted to embarrass him, to put him in his place. But then something unexpected happened. The boy took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He remembered something his grandmother had told him once: "When you're scared, just listen to the music inside you." He didn't know if it would work, but he had nothing to lose. He placed his fingers on the keys again, and this time, he let his instincts take over. The first few notes were hesitant, but then something clicked. His fingers began to move with a rhythm he didn't know he had. The melody that came out was simple but beautiful, a haunting tune that filled the room. The snickering stopped, replaced by silence. Even the teacher's smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise. The boy didn't notice. He was lost in the music, his fingers dancing across the keys. For the first time in a long time, he felt free. The weight of the teacher's disdain, the stares of his classmates, it all melted away. All that mattered was the music. When he finally stopped, the room was silent for a moment before erupting into applause. The boy opened his eyes, startled. He hadn't expected this. He looked at the teacher, who was now staring at him with an unreadable expression. For a moment, he thought he saw something like regret in her eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "That was unexpected," she said, her voice tight. "You may sit down." The boy returned to his seat, his heart still pounding. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew one thing: he had found something he loved. And no one, not even the teacher, could take that away from him. The teacher couldn't shake the memory of the boy's performance. It had been unexpected, almost unsettling. She had been so sure he would fail, so confident in her plan to humiliate him. But instead, he had played beautifully, and the class had applauded him. Even worse, she had seen a flicker of respect in some of her students' eyes, respect for him. That wasn't supposed to happen. She spent the evening pacing her living room, her mind racing. She couldn't let this go. She had to prove, to herself and to the class, that the boy's performance had been a fluke. Maybe he had memorized a simple tune or gotten lucky. There was no way someone like him, someone from his background, could truly have such talent. The next morning, she walked into the classroom with a new plan. She stood at the front of the room, her usual stern expression firmly in place. "Today," she announced, "we're going to do something different. We'll have a duet performance. 2 students will play the piano together. It's a great way to learn teamwork and coordination." The class murmured in curiosity. Duets weren't something they usually did, and the idea seemed interesting. The teacher's eyes scanned the room, landing on the boy. She had already decided who his partner would be. "You," she said, pointing at him. "And you," she added, pointing to one of the top students in the class, a girl who had been taking piano lessons since she was 5. The girl was known for her skill, and the teacher knew she would outshine the boy easily. The boy's stomach dropped. He had barely managed to play the day before, and now he was being asked to perform with someone who clearly knew what she was doing. He glanced at the girl, who gave him a polite but distant smile. She didn't seem thrilled about the pairing either. The teacher handed them a sheet of music. "Here's the piece you'll be playing. It's a simple duet, but it requires coordination. I expect you to practice during lunch and be ready to perform by the end of the day." The boy looked at the sheet music, his heart sinking. The notes looked complicated, and he had no idea how to read them. He had only played by ear the day before, relying on instinct rather than skill. This was different. This was impossible. The girl, however, seemed confident. "Don't worry," she said, though her tone was more dismissive than reassuring. "Just follow my lead. I'll take the harder part, and you can play the simpler one." They sat down at the piano during lunch, the girl immediately positioning her fingers on the keys. She began to play her part flawlessly, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The boy tried to keep up, but he stumbled over the notes, his hands fumbling awkwardly. "No, that's not right," the girl said, her patience wearing thin. "You're supposed to play this note here, not there." The boy felt his face grow hot with embarrassment. He tried again, but it was no use. He couldn't read the music, and he didn't have the skill to keep up with her. The teacher, watching from the corner of the room, felt a smug satisfaction. This was going exactly as she had hoped. The boy was struggling, and the girl's frustration was only making it worse. By the time they performed in front of the class, it would be clear that the boy's previous performance had been nothing more than luck. But as the lunch hour wore on, something unexpected happened. The girl, realizing how hard the boy was trying, began to soften. She stopped criticizing him and instead started explaining the notes more patiently. "Here," she said, pointing to the sheet music. "This is where you start. Just follow the rhythm, and I'll adjust to you." The boy nodded, grateful for her help. He tried again, this time focusing on the rhythm rather than the individual notes. Slowly, they began to play together, their parts blending into a coherent melody. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. By the end of lunch, they had managed to play the entire piece without stopping. The girl even smiled at him. "You're not bad," she said. "You just need practice." The boy felt a small spark of hope. Maybe he could do this after all. But as they prepared to perform in front of the class, the teacher's sharp voice cut through the room. "Remember," she said, her eyes narrowing at the boy, "this is about teamwork. Don't let your partner down." The boy's confidence wavered. He knew the teacher was watching him, waiting for him to fail. But he also knew he couldn't give up. Not now. As they sat down at the piano, the girl gave him a reassuring nod. "Just follow me," she whispered. The boy took a deep breath and placed his hands on the keys. The performance was about to begin, and he had no idea how it would end. The classroom was silent as the boy and the girl sat side by side at the piano. All eyes were on them, and the tension in the air was palpable. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he placed them on the keys, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the teacher's gaze boring into him, waiting for him to fail. The girl, sensing his nervousness, leaned over and whispered, "Just breathe. Follow my lead. You've got this." Her words gave him a small boost of confidence. He nodded, took a deep breath, and waited for her cue. The girl began to play, her fingers moving gracefully across the keys. The melody was soft and delicate, filling the room with a soothing sound. The boy listened carefully, waiting for his turn to join in. When the moment came, he pressed the keys, his part blending seamlessly with hers. At first, it was a little shaky. His timing wasn't perfect, and a few notes sounded off, but he kept going, focusing on the rhythm and the girl's guidance. Slowly, he began to relax, his fingers moving more confidently. The teacher, standing at the back of the room, frowned. This wasn't what she had expected. She had hoped the boy would stumble and embarrass himself, but instead, he was holding his own. She crossed her arms, her expression growing darker. As the duet continued, something magical happened. The boy and the girl's playing began to harmonize perfectly, their parts intertwining to create a beautiful, cohesive piece. The class watched in awe, completely captivated by the music. Even the teacher couldn't help but notice how well they were playing together. When the final note faded, the room erupted into applause. The boy looked up, surprised by the reaction. He had been so focused on playing that he hadn't realized how well it had gone. The girl smiled at him, clearly impressed. "That was amazing," one of the students exclaimed. "I didn't know you could play like that," another added. The boy felt a warm glow of pride. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged. But the teacher wasn't ready to let him off the hook. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the applause. "Well," she said, her tone icy, "it seems you've managed to get through it. But let's not forget, this was a team effort. Without your partner, you wouldn't have been able to play at all." Her words were like a bucket of cold water, dousing the boy's happiness. He looked down, his pride fading as quickly as it had come. The girl, however, wasn't having it. "Actually," she said, standing up, "he did really well. He worked hard, and he learned the piece in just one lunch break. That's not easy to do." The teacher's eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, the bell rang, signaling the end of class. The students began to gather their things, chatting excitedly about the performance. As the boy stood up to leave, the girl stopped him. "Hey," she said, "you've got talent. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." He gave her a small smile, grateful for her kindness. "Thanks," he said quietly. But as he walked out of the classroom, he couldn't shake the teacher's words. She had made it clear that she didn't believe in him, and he knew this wasn't over. The teacher, meanwhile, was already planning her next move. She couldn't let the boy's success go unchallenged. If he thought he could outshine her authority, he was sorely mistaken. The next day, the teacher walked into the classroom with a new plan. She had spent the night thinking about how to put the boy back in his place. If he thought he could impress the class with his so-called talent, she would show them just how limited he really was. She stood at the front of the room, her usual stern expression firmly in place. "Today," she announced, "we're going to have a little competition. Each of you will perform a solo piece on the piano. It's a great way to showcase your individual skills." The class murmured in excitement. A competition sounded fun, and everyone was eager to show off what they could do. The boy, however, felt a knot of dread form in his stomach. He knew this was directed at him. The teacher's eyes lingered on him for a moment too long, and he could see the challenge in her gaze. "You'll each have 10 minutes to prepare," the teacher continued. "Choose a piece you're comfortable with, and be ready to perform in front of the class. The students quickly scattered, some heading to the piano to practice, others flipping through sheet music. The boy sat at his desk, unsure of what to do. He didn't have any sheet music, and he didn't know any proper pieces. All he had was the instinctive playing he had done the other day. The girl from the duet noticed his hesitation and walked over. "Do you need help?" she asked. He nodded, feeling embarrassed. "I don't know any pieces. I just play by ear." She thought for a moment, then smiled. "That's okay. Just play what you feel. Sometimes, the best music comes from the heart, not the sheet." Her words gave him a little confidence, but he was still nervous. What if he messed up? What if the teacher was right, and he wasn't as good as he thought? When it was his turn to perform, the boy walked to the piano with shaky legs. He sat down, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. He thought about the music he had played before, the melody that had come so naturally to him. He let his fingers hover over the keys, waiting for the right moment to begin. And then he started to play. The melody was different this time, more complex, more emotional. It was as if the music was pouring out of him, telling a story without words. The class watched in silence, completely captivated. Even the teacher, despite herself, felt a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before bursting into applause. The boy looked up, surprised by the reaction. He had been so focused on playing that he hadn't realized how well it had gone. The teacher, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. "That was interesting," she said, her voice tight. "But let's not forget, real musicians read sheet music. Playing by ear is just a party trick." Her words stung, but the boy didn't let them show. He had done his best, and for the first time, he felt like that might be enough. The boy's performance had left a lasting impression on the class. For days afterward, his classmates couldn't stop talking about it. They marveled at how someone who had never taken a single piano lesson could play with such emotion and skill. Even the girl from the duet seemed to look at him differently, her earlier politeness replaced by genuine respect. But the teacher wasn't ready to let it go. She had been humiliated, not by the boy, but by her own inability to break his spirit. She had tried to embarrass him, to prove he didn't belong, but instead, he had only grown stronger. It infuriated her. One afternoon, as the students filed out of the classroom, she called the boy to her desk. He approached cautiously, unsure of what to expect. "Sit down," she said, her tone clipped. He obeyed, sitting across from her and keeping his eyes fixed on the desk. "I've been thinking," she began, "about your talent. It's clear you have some natural ability, but natural ability isn't enough. Real musicians are disciplined. They study. They practice. They follow the rules." The boy didn't respond. He wasn't sure what she was getting at. "I've decided to give you an opportunity," she continued. "There's a school-wide music competition next month. If you're serious about playing the piano, this is your chance to prove it. But it won't be easy. You'll need to learn a proper piece, and you'll need to perform it in front of the entire school." The boy's heart raced. A competition? In front of the whole school? He had never done anything like that before. "Of course," the teacher added, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "if you're not up to the challenge, I'll understand. It's not for everyone." Her words were a challenge, and the boy knew it. She was daring him to fail, to prove her right. But something inside him stirred, a quiet determination he hadn't felt before. "I'll do it," he said, his voice steady. The teacher raised an eyebrow, surprised by his confidence. "Very well," she said. "I'll give you the sheet music for the piece. You'll need to practice every day if you want to have any chance of succeeding." She handed him a thick stack of sheet music, the notes and intimidating. The boy took it, his hands trembling slightly. He had no idea how he was going to learn this, but he knew he had to try. That evening, he sat at the piano in his small living room, the sheet music spread out in front of him. He stared at the notes, trying to make sense of them, but it was like reading a foreign language. He felt a wave of frustration and doubt. Maybe the teacher was right. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. But then he remembered the way the music had felt when he played by ear, the freedom, the joy, the connection to something bigger than himself. He didn't want to lose that. He decided to start small, focusing on one measure at a time. He played the notes slowly, over and over, until his fingers began to remember the pattern. It was painstaking work, but he didn't give up. Days turned into weeks, and the boy practiced relentlessly. His hands ached, and his eyes grew tired from staring at the sheet music, but he kept going. He was determined to prove the teacher wrong, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. The girl from the duet noticed his dedication and offered to help. She showed him tips for reading sheet music and even stayed after school to practice with him. Slowly but surely, the piece began to take shape. As the competition drew closer, the boy felt a mix of excitement and fear. He knew the stakes were high, but he also knew he had come too far to turn back. The boy's days became a blur of school, practice, and more practice. Every spare moment was spent at the piano, his fingers moving over the keys as he worked to master the piece. The sheet music, once a jumble of confusing symbols, was slowly starting to make sense. He could now play the first few pages without too many mistakes, but there was still a long way to go. The girl from the duet continued to help him, her patience and encouragement making a world of difference. She showed him how to break the piece into smaller sections, focusing on one part at a time. "Don't think about the whole thing," she said. "Just focus on getting this one measure right. Then move on to the next." Her advice worked. Piece by piece, the music began to come together. The boy still struggled with the faster sections, his fingers tripping over the notes, but he didn't give up. He practiced those parts over and over, sometimes staying at the piano long after the sun had set. One afternoon, as he was practicing a particularly difficult passage, the teacher walked into the room. She had been watching him from afar, curious about his progress. She stood in the doorway, listening as he played. The boy didn't notice her at first. He was too focused on the music, his brow furrowed in concentration. When he finally looked up and saw her, he stopped playing, his heart skipping a beat. "Don't stop," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "Keep going." He hesitated, then nodded and started playing again. This time, he could feel her eyes on him, watching every move. It made him nervous, and he stumbled over a few notes, but he kept going. When he finished, the teacher was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You've improved." The boy blinked, surprised by the compliment. It was the first kind thing she had ever said to him. "But you're still not ready," she added, her tone sharp again. "The competition is in 2 weeks, and you're barely halfway through the piece. You'll need to work harder if you want to have any chance of winning." Her words stung, but the boy didn't let them discourage him. He had come too far to give up now. That night, he practiced longer than ever before. His hands were sore, and his eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but he kept going. He played the difficult passage over and over, determined to get it right. As the days passed, the boy's confidence grew. He could now play most of the piece without too many mistakes, and he was starting to add his own touches to the music, little flourishes and pauses that made it feel more personal. The girl noticed the change. "You're not just playing the notes anymore," she said one day. "You're making it your own. That's what real musicians do." Her words filled him with pride. For the first time, he felt like he might actually have a chance at the competition. But as the date drew closer, the pressure began to build. The boy knew that everyone would be watching him, waiting to see if he could live up to the hype. And he knew that the teacher would be there too, ready to pounce on any mistake. With only a week left until the competition, the boy's nerves were starting to get the better of him. He had practiced tirelessly, but the pressure was mounting. Every time he sat at the piano, his mind filled with doubts. What if he messed up? What if he forgot the notes? What if the teacher was right, and he wasn't good enough? One evening, as he was practicing, he hit a wrong note and froze. His hands hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. He tried to start again, but the mistake played on a loop in his mind, making it hard to focus. Frustrated, he slammed the piano lid shut and buried his face in his hands. His mother, who had been quietly watching from the corner of the room, walked over and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. The boy looked up, his eyes filled with frustration. "I can't do it," he said. "It's too hard. I'm never going to be ready in time." His mother sat down beside him, her expression kind but firm. "You've come so far," she said. "Don't give up now. Remember why you started this in the first place." Her words struck a chord. The boy thought back to the first time he had played the piano in class, the way the music had made him feel free and alive. He didn't want to lose that feeling. The next day at school, the girl from the duet noticed his mood. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You look like you haven't slept." The boy sighed. "I'm just worried about the competition. What if I mess up in front of everyone?" The girl smiled. "Everyone gets nervous before a performance. Even the best musicians in the world make mistakes. The important thing is to keep going, no matter what." Her words helped, but the boy still felt uneasy. Later that day, the teacher called him to her desk again. "The competition is in a few days," she said, her tone sharp. "I hope you're ready. The judges won't go easy on you just because you're new to this." The boy nodded, but inside, his doubts were growing. What if he wasn't ready? What if he let everyone down? That night, he sat at the piano again, determined to push through his fears. He started playing the piece from the beginning, focusing on each note, each measure. But halfway through, he hit another wrong note and stopped, his frustration boiling over. "I can't do this," he muttered, slumping forward. But then he remembered his mother's words and the girl's encouragement. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and let his hands find the keys again. This time, he didn't think about the competition or the teacher or the judges. He just played. The music flowed out of him, raw and emotional. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, the girl approached him with an idea. "Why don't we practice together after school?" she suggested. "Sometimes, playing with someone else can help you relax." The boy agreed, and that afternoon, they sat at the piano together. The girl played the accompaniment while he played the main melody. Having her there made a world of difference. He felt less alone, less pressured. As they played, the boy's confidence began to return. He still made mistakes, but he didn't let them stop him. He kept going, focusing on the music rather than his fears. By the end of the session, he felt like a weight had been lifted. The girl smiled at him. "You're ready," she said. "Just remember to breathe and enjoy it. The rest will come naturally." Her words gave him the boost he needed. He still felt nervous, but he was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could do this. The day of the competition arrived, and the school auditorium was buzzing with excitement. Students, teachers, and parents filled the seats, their chatter creating a low hum of anticipation. Backstage, the boy stood nervously, clutching the sheet music in his hands. His heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the other performers warming up. The girl from the duet found him and gave him an encouraging smile. "You've got this," she said. Just play like you did during our practice. Don't overthink it. He nodded, trying to steady his breathing. He could see the teacher standing nearby, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She hadn't said a word to him all day, but her presence alone was enough to make him anxious. One by one, the performers took the stage. Some played flawlessly, their fingers dancing across the keys with ease. Others stumbled, their nerves getting the better of them. The boy watched from the wings, his stomach twisting into knots. Finally, it was his turn. The announcer called his name, and the audience applauded politely as he walked onto the stage. The bright lights made it hard to see, but he could feel everyone's eyes on him. He sat down at the piano, his hands trembling as he placed them on the keys. For a moment, he froze. His mind went blank, and he couldn't remember how the piece started. Panic set in, and he glanced out at the audience, his heart racing. Then he saw her, the girl from the duet. She was sitting in the front row, giving him a thumbs up and a reassuring smile. Her confidence in him gave him the strength to push through his fear. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and let his hands find the first note. The music began softly, the melody flowing out of him like a gentle stream. As he played, he focused on the feeling of the keys beneath his fingers and the sound of the music filling the room. The audience was silent, completely captivated. Even the teacher, standing at the back of the auditorium, couldn't help but listen. The boy's playing was raw and emotional, filled with a depth that no amount of technical skill could replicate. As he reached the final notes, the music swelled, filling the room with a sense of triumph. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the audience erupted into applause. The boy stood up, his legs shaky, and bowed slightly before walking off the stage. Backstage, the girl was waiting for him, her face beaming. "You did it," she said, giving him a quick hug. "That was amazing." The boy felt a rush of relief and pride. He had done it. He had faced his fears and played his heart out. But the competition wasn't over yet. There were still a few performers left, and the boy knew the results wouldn't be announced until the end. He sat backstage, his nerves returning as he waited. When the final performer finished, the judges gathered to deliberate. The boy's heart pounded as he waited for the results. He didn't care about winning, he just wanted to know he had done his best. Finally, the announcer took the stage. "Thank you to all our performers," she said. "Now, it's time to announce the winners." The boy held his breath, his hands clenched into fists. The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium as she began to announce the winners. "In third place," she said, "we have a talented performer who delivered a beautiful rendition of a classical piece. Congratulations to..." The boy barely heard the name. His heart was pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. He glanced at the girl from the duet, who gave him an encouraging smile. "In second place," the announcer continued, "we have a performer who showcased incredible technical skill and precision. Congratulations to..." Again, the boy didn't catch the name. He was too focused on his own racing thoughts. What if he didn't place at all? What if all his hard work had been for nothing? The announcer paused, building suspense. "And now, for our first place winner," she said, her voice rising with excitement. This performer moved us all with their emotional and heartfelt performance. Their music wasn't just played, it was felt. Congratulations to..." The boy's breath caught in his throat. "Our very own, boy's name." The auditorium erupted into applause, louder than before. The boy stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what he had just heard. The girl from the duet nudged him, her face lit up with excitement. "Go on," she said. "That's you." He walked onto the stage, his legs feeling like jelly. The audience was on their feet, clapping and cheering. He looked out at the sea of faces, his eyes landing on his mother, who was wiping tears from her eyes. Even the teacher, standing at the back of the room, had a look of stunned silence on her face. The announcer handed him a trophy and a certificate, shaking his hand. "Congratulations," she said. "That was truly remarkable." The boy held the trophy tightly, his heart swelling with pride. He had done it. He had proven to himself, and to everyone else, that he belonged. After the ceremony, the girl from the duet ran up to him, her excitement contagious. "I knew you could do it," she said. "You were amazing." The boy smiled, still in shock. "Thanks," he said. "I couldn't have done it without your help." As they talked, the teacher approached. The boy tensed, unsure of what to expect. But to his surprise, her expression was softer than usual. "That was impressive," she said, her tone hesitant. "You've clearly worked hard." The boy nodded, unsure of how to respond. The teacher paused, then added, "Perhaps I underestimated you. Talent comes in many forms, and it's clear you have a gift." Her words were unexpected, but they meant more to the boy than she could have known. He had spent so long feeling like he didn't belong, but now, for the first time, he felt seen. As the crowd began to disperse, the boy's mother came over and hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. The boy hugged her back, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had faced his fears, pushed through his doubts, and come out stronger on the other side. That night, as he sat at the piano in his living room, he played the piece one more time. But this time, it wasn't for anyone else. It was for him. The music flowed out of him, free and unrestrained, a celebration of everything he had overcome. And as he played, he realized something important: this was just the beginning.